In life, there are beginnings that seem like a wrong turn, yet they open the door to a story no one could have imagined. Picture this: a young woman, her heart scarred, pushed into a decision that wasn't her own. A hurried wedding in the cold atmosphere of a hospital, where the steady beep of monitors replaced the sound of wedding music. A man lay unconscious, unaware of the woman who had just become his wife, and a whispered promise bound tightly to fate. "I'll stay until you wake up. At the very least, you won't be alone." The story begins where it feels like it should have ended. A marriage without love, without smiles, marked only by sacrifice, pressure, and a brave heart willing to carry a burden for someone else. Yet, right there in that moment, the seed of an extraordinary love was sown. And to understand, we must return to the fateful evening. Laura Bennett sat on a hard plastic chair in the stark white corridor of Mercy Hill Hospital. Outside, rain lashed against the window like a grim omen, streaking long lines across the glass. She shivered fingers clutching the hem of her cheap blue dress so tightly her knuckles turned white. Surrounding her were the cold faces of the Cross family. Sharp suits, expensive fur coats, eyes like blades. The first to speak was Evelyn Cross, the matriarch and wielder of power in the family. "Laura, you must do this," she said, her voice quiet yet sharp as a knife. "Your sister has run away. The wedding cannot be canceled. Our family cannot lose its honor. Do you understand the consequences?" Laura trembled. She glanced through the frosted glass at the motionless figure of Daniel Cross. Once a renowned CEO gracing the cover of Forbes, now lying unconscious after a brutal accident. He had been her sister's fiancé, not hers. "But I'm not his bride, Laura," whispered her voice breaking. Evelyn cut her off, her eyes like ice. "If the wedding doesn't happen, the hospital will immediately stop your mother's treatment. Do you want to watch your mother die in your arms?" The words fell like a hammer blow. Laura's mind filled with the image of her mother, coughing violently in their rundown apartment walls, peeling cold air seeping through cracked windows. If the Cross family had truly cared, they would have given her mother proper care. But no, they kept her alive just enough, using hospital bills as leverage, treating her like a hostage. Daniel's engagement had already been announced, publicly tied to several major business contracts. If the wedding was canceled, the family's stock and reputation would plummet. And so, they forced Laura into her sister's place, dangling her mother's survival as the price. A lawyer in a gray suit stepped forward, placing a thick file into her hands. "Just sign. Tomorrow there will be a small ceremony in the hospital chapel. Nothing more than a formality." Her hand shook as she held the pen. Laura looked at Daniel one last time, his face still sharp and striking, his brown hair disheveled on the white pillow, his skin pale beneath the fluorescent lights. He seemed so distant, as if he belonged to another world, a world of wealth and untouchable power. And yet now their lives were being chained together in a ruthless game of control. The scratch of the pen echoed louder than the rain against the glass. Her signature appeared, a mark she could never take back. The next morning, the hospital chapel glowed faintly with light, filtering through stained glass windows. The small room smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. Laura wore the plainest dress she owned, pressed as neatly as possible, though its fabric was already faded. It was far too humble for what was supposed to be a wedding. Nurses silently wheeled Daniel's bed, inside the soft squeak of wheels on tile filling the silence. The monitor beeped steadily, a cold, unrelenting drumbeat. There were no flowers, no music, only a handful of stern faces watching. When the priest recited the vows, his voice echoed against the empty walls. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Laura's chest tightened. A simple gold band was slipped onto her trembling finger. On Daniel's hand, of course, there was no response. No applause, no smiles. Only the flat beeping of machines and heat light filtering through stained glass, casting shadows across his pale face. Laura inhaled sharply, her chest aching. In that instant, she knew her life had turned down a path she had never chosen. Night fell, stretching shadows down the long corridors. After the relatives had all gone, Laura stayed alone by Daniel's side. The ICU was silent, but for the green glow of monitors reflecting across his motionless face. Her hand shook as she reached out and gently placed it over his. His skin was cool beneath the sterile lights, and her heart clenched. "I'm sorry." Her voice broke into a whisper as tears streamed down her cheeks. I never wanted this, but I had no choice. In her other hand, she clutched a tarnished silver locket, the only piece of jewelry her mother had given her, taken from her own neck before Laura left home. "Take it with you, Laura," her mother had said through coughs. "When you feel alone, remember I am still with you." Laura opened her palm, the locket glinting faintly under the light. She placed it beside Daniel's still hand, a fragile truth amid the falsehood of their marriage. Leaning close to the edge of the bed, she whispered into the silence, "Even if you can't hear me, I promise, I'll stay until the day you wake up. At the very least, you won't be alone." Outside, the rain softened, falling in scattered drops. But inside that stark white room, Laura's whispered vow carved itself into her heart, binding her to the man still lost in sleep. That night, Laura returned to her tiny apartment. The windows rattled and the wind curtains tattered and flapping. In the kitchen, only a few packets of cheap noodles remained, the last supply for her and her mother. She boiled a little water, making a thin, bitter coffee that scraped down her throat like despair. On the wobbly wooden table, unpaid bills piled high, electricity medication, and a notice from the landlord, each piece of paper clamped tighter around her chest. She glanced at her mother curled on the worn sofa, shivering under a thin blanket, her pale face twisted in fits of coughing. Laura rushed over, rubbing her back gently, whispering comfort like her mother once did for her. Her mother lifted her watery eyes, voice trembling between coughs. "Laura, you've grown so thin. All these bills, all those sleepless nights, all because of me. If not for me, you'd be free. Maybe you shouldn't waste more money on me. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to see you throw away your youth just to keep me breathing." The words broke Laura's soul. Her body shook as she clutched her mother's frail hands, her knuckles bone white. "Don't say that, Mom," she sobbed, voice tearing. "If I lost you, I'd lose everything. Every sacrifice I've made, every choice. It's all so I can keep you here with me. You are the only reason I can go on." She buried her face in her mother's hands, tears soaking the thin skin. "You think I'd be happy if you stopped your medicine?" Laura's voice cracked, trembling yet fierce. "No, Mom, I'd lose it all. I don't care how hard life gets as long as I can hear your voice each morning, as long as I can see your smile. I'll endure anything." Her mother's weak fingers stroked her hair, trembling, but filled with love. Tears welled in her eyes, too. "My foolish girl," she whispered, her voice lost in a cough. "I wanted to give up, but hearing you now, I know I must fight, not just for me, but for you." Laura looked up, her eyes swollen with tears, but blazing with determination. "Then promise me, Mom, promise you won't give up, because I need you, and I'll do anything, everything to keep you here with me." In their small, shabby apartment with wind rattling the broken window, warmth flickered between mother and daughter, a fragile flame of love that lit the cold darkness. The next night, Laura returned to the hospital. The sterile corridor stretched endlessly under the white glow of fluorescent lights, the scent of antiseptic heavy in the air. Each step felt heavier, carrying the weight of an invisible sentence. She pushed open the ICU door. The familiar sound greeted her immediately, the steady, merciless beeping of machines. Daniel lay motionless, shadows of the monitor light painting his face. Dragging a chair close, she sat and opened her old sketchbook on her lap. The rough pages bore the marks of countless turns, her charcoal pencil trembling as it traced his features. The straight bridge of his nose, the heavy lashes, the unmoving lips. A face once distant now, etched into every breath of her life. She stared for a long time, eyes rimmed with red. Her voice broke as she whispered a confession into the silence. "Strange, isn't it? I carry your name as my husband, yet we've never spoken a word to each other. They say I had no choice. I believed it too. But if you ever wake up, will you hate me? Will you see me as the one who trapped you? Or will you understand that I did it only to keep my mother alive?" Her words dissolved into the air, swallowed by the machine's rhythm. Her shoulders shook, tears falling onto the page, smudging the charcoal lines. She lifted her left hand, staring at the cold gold band on her ring finger. It gleamed under the light, yet to her, it felt like a shackle chaining her youth and freedom. A marriage not born of love, but of force. Seeking the only anchor she had, Laura pulled the silver locket from her pocket once more. Its metal still carried the faint warmth of her mother's hand, echoing her words. Take it with you, Laura, and remember, I am always with you." She placed it beside Daniel's hand, whispering softly, "Amid all these lies, this is my only truth, love. I want to believe that one day you'll see this too, and know it isn't false." In the hushed darkness, Laura sat still. The rain outside had ceased, leaving a silence so deep it pressed against her chest. Yet inside her heart, one vow kept beating, refusing to let her collapse. "Even if the whole world turns away, I'll stay. I'll sit here waiting until a miracle happens." And that vow in the sterile white room became the single thread keeping her from falling into despair. Laura jolted awake in the suffocating night, her back drenched in cold sweat. The alarm clock blinked 3 to 17 a.m., while the sound of her mother's frail coughs echoed from the living room, stabbing her heart. The last of the medicine was gone. Their cramped apartment reeked of mildew and cheap antibiotics, every corner heavy with hopelessness. She sat up, eyes falling on the stack of bills piled on the table. Electricity would be cut off in 3 days if unpaid. The landlord had repeated his threats to evict her by the end of the month. On her phone, a message from the clinic glowed, "We cannot renew your mother's prescription until the outstanding balance is settled." Laura covered her face, whispering like a lost soul. "What am I supposed to do?" No one answered. Only the relentless tick of the clock filled the silence, drowning her deeper in despair. That morning, Laura returned to the hospital. The long, white corridor stretched endlessly, heels clicking in the distance. She shrank back when she saw Lydia, her haughty cousin, gliding toward her in an expensive silk dress. Lydia's lips curved into a cruel smile. "Well, look at that Mrs. Cross. Who would have thought the poor girl who can't even pay her rent would end up as Daniel's wife? When he wakes up, he'll probably faint again once he sees who's wearing his ring." The mocking laughter echoed after her, burning Laura's cheeks with shame. She gripped the strap of her worn fabric bag, swallowing her humiliation like poison. She reminded herself, "I'm doing this for Mom, for her life." That afternoon, lawyer Andrew Fletcher arrived. A middle-aged man in a gray suit, silver-rimmed glasses glinting. He set a thick stack of papers beside Daniel's bed. "Mrs. Cross, this is an addendum. You need to sign it if you want the family to continue covering your mother's medical bills." Laura's throat tightened. "What does it say?" "You may not appear in public without permission. You may not involve yourself in company matters. You are absolutely forbidden from touching cross-family assets. Refuse, and the medical support ends immediately." Her fingers trembled as she picked up the pen. Each word slashed at her dignity, tightening the chain around her neck. She would become nothing more than a nameless shadow in this forced marriage. But the image of her mother, struggling for breath, left her no choice. Eyes shut, she signed. When Fletcher left, Laura collapsed against Daniel's bedside, tears soaking his pillow. "Do you know, Daniel, they treat me like I'm invisible. I don't want your money. I only want my mother to live." Her life fell into a rhythm between two worlds, the damp apartment with her ailing mother and the sterile ICU where her silent husband lay. Mornings were for spooning porridge and medicine to her mother. Nights were for sitting by Daniel, with her sketchbook drawing the still lines of his face. Each stroke of charcoal captured not only his features, but also her own loneliness. Sometimes in the quiet of midnight, she softly hummed her mother's lullaby. "Sleep in peace, though, life's a storm. Smile still, though the heart is torn." And for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw Daniel's fingers twitch. Just a trick of her mind, she told herself. Yet her heart raced hope, glimmering faintly in the dark. One afternoon in the hospital cafeteria, Lydia appeared again. Her sharp voice rang out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at her, eating dry bread like she owns the Cross estate. How long do you think she'll last? A month, a week. Daniel will be so proud when he wakes to find he married a beggar." Snickers rippled through the room. Laura lowered her head, fists clenched under the table, blood boiling. But she forced herself to breathe, to swallow it down. As long as her mother had medicine, nothing else mattered. That night she returned to Daniel. Opening her sketchbook, she traced the curve of his cheek, the stray lock of hair falling across his forehead. "You don't even know my name," she whispered. "But I've memorized every line of your face, every rhythm of your breath. They say I'm using you, but the truth is I'm only trying to survive." She set the pencil down, reaching to clasp his hand. His skin was cold, yet she could have sworn there was the faintest shiver. Laura's breath caught her pulse racing. She pressed his hand to her chest, whispering urgently, "If you can hear me, please don't hate me. I never chose this. But at the very least I chose not to leave you." The machines beeped steadily, indifferent to her words. Yet Laura stayed clutching the ember of hope like a fragile flame against the storm. Day by day, the hospital room became her second home. Each morning, she sketched Daniel from a new angle, the slope of his jaw under the sterile light, his hand resting limply on the sheets, his lashes fluttering as though dreaming. In those sketches, she found her reason to endure, not for herself, but for the fragile belief that patience and sincerity might bend fate. One evening after she tucked her mother into bed, the older woman gripped her hand, eyes searching deeply. "You're different, Laura. I see it in your eyes. A light I haven't seen in so long, like you're holding on to a little hope. But remember this, my girl. You don't just deserve to survive. You deserve to live." The words washed over her like cool water, rinsing away the dust of despair. Laura broke down sobbing into her mother's thin shoulder. Her tears soaked the faded fabric, her heart bursting open. In those fragile arms, she realized all her sacrifices weren't only to keep her mother breathing, but also to prove to herself that love, somehow, could bloom even in the harshest soil. That was the hope that kept her moving forward, that one day Daniel would awaken and see her not as a despised stand-in bride, but as the woman who stayed despite it all. Laura's hope wasn't for riches or power. It was painfully simple to see him smile, to hear a word of thanks, to know her presence by his side wasn't meaningless. And so, with machines humming in the background, Laura closed her eyes, whispering the vow that carried her through. "Even if the world turns away, I'll stay. I'll wait here until a miracle comes." That afternoon, the sky hung heavy beneath a shroud of gray. Clouds pressed low over the city, dim lights flickering through the hospital's glass windows. Laura stepped out of the elevator, her worn shoes dragging as though each step carried the weight of the world. The faint smell of medicine still clung to her hands, her eyes swollen from another day spent chasing prescriptions for her mother. The corridor felt endless, the antiseptic air suffocating. But today something was different. Nurses glanced at her briefly, then quickly turned away. From down the hall came hurried footsteps and anxious whispers. A chill of dread gripped Laura's chest as her hand touched the ICU door. Inside, the air was thick, as if the whole room was holding its breath. Evelyn stood rigid at the foot of the bed, her gaze sharp as a blade. Lydia leaned smugly against the wall, arms crossed, a smirk curling her lips. Other relatives clustered around, their eyes fixed on the figure in the bed, like witnesses awaiting judgment. And then the unthinkable happened. A harsh white light pierced Daniel's eyes. His lashes trembled before his lids slowly opened after endless months of stillness. His body felt like lead chained to the bed, while the steady beep-beep of machines pounded in his ears, each sound a strike from an unfamiliar world. Pain throbbed at his temples, his brow furrowed. In the haze, realization dawned. After so long in darkness, he was awake. Laura froze in the doorway, her heart racing wildly. The moment she had both dreaded and longed for was here. "Daniel!" she breathed, voice quivering. She rushed to his side, clutching his cold hand with trembling fingers as tears streamed down her cheeks. "You're awake, truly awake." The first face Daniel saw was not a doctor, not a relative, but a young woman by his bedside. Her cheeks hollowed from sleepless nights, eyes red and swollen, her hand gripping his as if it were her lifeline. His brows knit in confusion. He knew this face. Familiar, yet wrong. Memories flickered back. Before the accident, his fiancée had been the eldest Bennett daughter, their grand engagement party awash with flashing lights and champagne toasts. But this wasn't her. This was Laura Bennett, the younger sister, the quiet girl who had always lingered at the edges of gatherings, his throat-rasped voice hoarse and weak. "What happened, and why are you here?" The question sliced through the silence. Laura flinched, lips parting, but her voice died in her throat. Lydia's sharp laugh broke the tension, echoing cruelly. She stepped forward, eyes glittering with malice. "Well, you finally noticed, didn't you? Incredible? After all that sleep, and yet your memory's intact." "That's right, Daniel. She isn't your bride. Her sister ran away. And to save the family's precious honor, they shoved this little nobody into the wedding instead." The room fell into suffocating silence. Doctors, nurses, relatives, all waited breathless. Daniel turned to Laura, his eyes clouded with shock and confusion. His memories fractured, uncertain. The one I was engaged to. Where is she? Evelyn stepped forward, arms folded, her voice soft but sharp as glass. She abandoned us, fled her duty, leaving the family in disgrace. To protect our name and keep the contracts intact, we had no choice but to put Laura in her place. The wedding happened, honor preserved. That's all you need to know. Daniel's world spun. His chest ached not only from old wounds, but from the crushing realization that his life had been rewritten without his consent. A marriage, carried out while he lay unconscious. A wife he had never chosen. His gaze locked back on Laura, searching, unsettled. She trembled, twisting the fabric of her dress in her fists. Her voice cracked as the truth spilled out. It's true. I wasn't your fiancé. They forced me to take her place. My mother is sick. She needed treatment. If I refused, she would have died. I had no choice. Her words broke apart, tangled in sobs. Daniel closed his eyes, breathing hard. Memories collided in his mind. The shallow smiles of his former fiancée, hollow promises whispered at glittering parties, the backroom deals disguised as romance. Now, opening his eyes again, he found the younger sister at his bedside, called his wife by name. It felt like a cruel joke. So, all of this happened without me knowing. I've been made a pawn, and you... His gaze fixed on Laura, torn between anger and despair. You were part of it. Laura shook her head, violently, tears pouring. No, I never lied to you. I never pretended to be her. They forced me into that chapel, slid the ring on my finger while you were unconscious. I never wanted this. But I couldn't abandon you. Not when you lay here alone. I stayed not for money, not for power, but because I couldn't be so cruel as to walk away from you. The room held its breath. Laura's heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the machines. Daniel's eyes, stormy and unsettled, wavered between suspicion and something else. Something fragile. Lydia smirked in triumph. Evelyn's lips curved in a thin, satisfied smile. Finally, Daniel turned his face aside, shoulders heavy, his voice raw with torment. I need time. I don't know what to believe anymore. The words fell like a hammer on Laura's heart. Her knees threatened to give way, vision blurred with tears. Lydia chuckled under her breath, smug. Evelyn's cold smile deepened. Laura clutched her sketchbook tightly to her chest, the only proof she had of her sincerity, filled with countless nights of silent devotion. Without a word, she turned and walked out, closing the door on whispers, cruel smiles, and a man newly awakened into a storm of doubt. That night, Laura sat in the dim apartment, the glow of a street lamp leaking through torn curtains. Her mother slept fitfully, breath ragged. Laura stared blankly at the open sketchbook before her, Daniel's face blurred by her falling tears. You're awake, she whispered into the dark. But the way you looked at me, worse than any nightmare. Maybe I should have wished you stayed asleep instead of waking only to see me as a liar. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lydia: leave quietly, and we'll keep paying for your mother's medicine. Stay, and you'll both regret it. Laura's hands shook violently, fear choking her throat. But deep inside, a flicker of resolve still burned, the fragile hope that somehow Daniel would one day see her heart. The next morning, she returned to the hospital. She hadn't slept, had barely moved from her mother's side, but one thought had guided her through the night: she could not run, not like her sister. If she left now, all her nights of vigil would mean nothing. When the door opened, Daniel was awake, his gaze instantly drawn to her. In those pale eyes stormed a tempest, anger, confusion, and something reaching for light. Laura hesitated at the threshold, then quietly walked forward, taking her seat by his bed. She didn't speak. She only opened her sketchbook to a blank page and began to draw her trembling pencil, the only way to steady her heart. The tension snapped as Evelyn's harsh voice rang out. Have you no shame, Laura? Leave this place at once before we drag you out. Her words cut through the air like a blade. Laura bit her lip, hands shaking as she sketched. She did not beg. She did not defend herself. She simply stayed. And then Daniel's voice broke the silence. Weak, raspy, but firm. Let her stay. Every eye in the room widened. Evelyn's head whipped around, her glare burning with fury. Lydia's smirk fell from her face. Laura looked up, eyes brimming, meeting Daniel's gaze. In that fragile moment beneath the storm, she saw it. The faintest crack in the wall of suspicion, a sliver of light breaking through. The boardroom of Cross Enterprises gleamed under the brilliance of crystal chandeliers. Towering glass walls reflected every tense expression, amplifying the unease that rippled through the room. On the long walnut table, thick stacks of files lay neatly arranged like evidence awaiting trial. Outside the heavy doors, the muffled roar of reporters and the flash of cameras pressed like a drumbeat against the air inside. Laura stood near the entrance, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. It was the only thing she had, both shield and testimony, against the powerful family determined to cast her out. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it above the whispers, her palms damp with sweat. After what had happened in the hospital today felt less like a meeting and more like a courtroom. Evelyn, Lydia, the shareholders. All eyes would be fixed on her. At the head of the table sat Daniel. His frame was thinner from the months in a coma, but the tailored suit and the sharp glint in his eyes silenced the room. The man once celebrated on financial magazine covers still radiated authority. Yet today, his gaze rested not on the charts or contracts, but on Laura. Behind the cool steel of his eyes flickered something deeper. Evelyn's shrill but commanding voice broke the stillness. "We must settle this now. That marriage carried out while Daniel lay unconscious was a mistake. To protect the company's reputation and stock, it must be annulled immediately." Whispers rippled across the table. Lydia leaned forward, lips curled in a venomous smile. "Uncle, the press will devour us alive if they learn this woman was never the true fiancé. She's nothing but a cheap stand-in." Every gaze swung toward Laura. Her knees weakened, her back pressing against the wall. Shame scorched her, but before she could retreat further, Daniel's voice cut through the noise. "Is that true?" His words rang out like a summons, pulling the entire room into silence. His eyes locked on Laura, sharp, unyielding. Laura inhaled shakily, tightening her grip on the sketchbook. Her voice quavered at first, but grew steadier as the truth spilled out. "I never lied. I never pretended to be anyone else. They forced me down that aisle, slipped the ring on my hand, and threatened that if I refused, my mother would lose her medicine, her chance to live. I hated myself for signing. But from that moment on, I couldn't leave you alone." The room held its breath. Only the clock ticked each beat, counting down her fate. With trembling hands, Laura opened the sketchbook and laid it on the table. The sound of rustling paper was small, yet it sliced through the dense silence. She pushed it toward Daniel. "This is what I did through the long nights you lay still. No schemes, no ambition, only reminders to myself that you weren't a contract or a pawn, but a man. A man I refused to abandon." Page after page revealed charcoal portraits. Daniel with his eyes closed, hair tousled against the pillow, his hand drawn as though grasping another. Each stroke was delicate, painstaking, so alive that several shareholders instinctively leaned closer. "Hushed." Lydia sneered, scoffing loudly. A book of scribbles proves nothing, just cheap pity drawn in pencil. But Daniel had already taken the sketchbook into his hands. Slowly, he turned each page. The cold edge in his eyes softened as he absorbed the hours, the nights, the devotion etched into every line. When he reached the sketch of his hand clasping hers, his rigid mask cracked, revealing a fragile human ache. Looking up, his voice rang clear, warm, yet cutting. "While all of you counted profits and contracts, she stayed. She never left. And if I'm alive and sitting here today, it's because someone treated me as a man, not as stock value." The boardroom erupted. Whispers rose like thunder. Some faces shocked, others unsettled. Evelyn scowled, voice sharp as steel. "Daniel, you cannot be serious. That girl?" "Enough," Daniel's voice thundered, silencing even her. "Laura is not a pawn. She is not a replacement. She is my wife, and anyone who disrespects her disrespects me." Gasps echoed. Lydia's face drained of color, her mocking smile frozen in place. Evelyn's lips pressed into a hard line, fury simmering, but even she dared not argue further. Laura stood frozen, her ears ringing, her heart bursting. Tears flooded her eyes. Never had she imagined someone would defend her, least of all the man she had once feared would despise her most. The meeting ended in tense silence, shareholders exchanging uneasy glances as they filed out. In the empty hallway afterward, Daniel approached. His footsteps echoed until he stood before her, holding out the sketchbook. His voice was rough, low, but unwavering. "Laura, I can't erase the false beginning we had. But from now on, I want to choose. And I choose you." Her breath hitched, tears cascading freely. "Why?" she whispered. He brushed the cover of the sketchbook with his fingers, his eyes softening in rare tenderness. "Because every page showed me the truth. You stayed not because you were forced, but because your heart couldn't walk away." That night, Laura returned to the apartment, clutching the sketchbook as if it were the most precious treasure she owned. Her mother looked up from the couch, eyes clouded with weakness, yet glimmering with hope. Laura sank down beside her, voice breaking. "Mom, today," he said, "my drawing showed him the truth, that I didn't stay because I was forced, but because of my heart, and he chose me." Tears spilled while her mother's lips curved into a faint but radiant smile. "You see, my child, I told you, you don't just deserve to survive, you deserve to be loved." Laura broke down, sobbing into her mother's embrace. For the first time in endless months, fear gave way to fragile, trembling belief. Maybe happiness could truly find her. Outside, the city lights reflected in puddles from the last rain shimmering gold. But inside that small apartment, Laura felt as though she stood beneath a new sky, where wounds could heal and love could bloom in even the hardest ground. Winter sunlight spilled across the streets, glinting off the glass windows of newspaper offices like 1,000 sharpened blades. Only days after the stormy board meeting, Laura and Daniel became the center of every headline. Sensational titles screamed from every newsstand: CEO cross-defends, substitute bride. Mystery marriage threatens cross. Enterprise's future. Whenever Laura stepped outside, a wall of reporters, closed-in cameras flashing incessantly. Once she had walked unnoticed in worn shoes down quiet sidewalks. Now each step was hunted, every glance dissected. Whispers followed her like knives. But in the midst of the frenzy, Daniel was always there. Though still recovering, he stood at her side, his hand wrapped firmly around hers, his icy gaze sweeping over the crowd like a warning. One afternoon, when reporters shoved too close outside the hospital gates, Daniel stopped, his voice steady and commanding. "This is my wife. I choose her, no matter what you say." Cameras exploded in a storm of light. Shouts filled the air. Laura looked up at him, her throat tight, her eyes stinging. That one declaration erased all the days she had been mocked, treated as nothing more than a cheap replacement bride. But the storm didn't subside. Inside the company, pressure mounted. Evelyn held secret meetings with shareholders, whispering that Laura was a danger to their reputation. Lydia spread poison further, that Laura was exploiting Daniel's illness for privilege, that she had leveraged his condition for gain. Each article was a dagger, slicing deeper into Laura's fragile dignity. One evening, Laura sat in their dim apartment, the yellow glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows. Her mother finally slept soundly, breathing easier thanks to fresh medicine. But Laura, scrolling through her laptop, saw the latest photos. Herself, caught unflatteringly on the street, plastered beneath the headline, "Contract Bride Love or Manipulation." Her tears fell silently. She whispered to herself, "Am I strong enough to keep going?" The door opened. Daniel entered, exhaustion etched in his face, but fire still burning in his eyes. He dropped a stack of newspapers on the table and sat across from her, his voice firm and resolute. "They can write what they want. The only truth is that I chose you. And I'll keep saying it again and again until the whole world believes." Laura clutched her teacup with trembling hands, voice quivering. "But I'm afraid that you, me, my mother, we'll all be crushed." Daniel leaned in, lifting her chin until her tearful eyes met his. His gaze was unwavering. "You're not alone anymore. You stayed by me when everyone else turned away. Now, let me stand in front of you." Weeks later, Cross Enterprises hosted a major press event to unveil a new project. The hall was packed with media cameras poised like weapons. Daniel strode onto the stage, steady, commanding the spotlight, etching sharp shadows across his face. He spoke, then paused. His eyes swept the crowd, his voice suddenly ringing with clarity. "Before I continue, I want to introduce someone who stood by me when I was unconscious, when the world abandoned me. Someone I willingly call my wife. He descended the steps, took Laura's hand, and drew her onto the stage. A wave of flashes blinded her murmurs, rising like a tide. Her knees trembled, her fingers cold, but the warmth of his hand anchoring hers gave her strength. "She is not a replacement," Daniel declared, his voice unyielding. "She is my choice, and if anyone doubts it, look at me. I have never been more certain in my life." The hall erupted in thunderous applause. Some shareholders exchanged wary glances, but doubt flickered in their eyes. Laura stood beside Daniel, tears streaming, a smile breaking across her face for the first time. Light unburdened. That night, Laura sat beside her mother, who clasped her hand, pride glistening in her frail eyes. "My child, I've lived long enough to know. True love isn't proven by wealth, but by who stands with you when storms strike. And you've found that, haven't you?" Laura leaned into her mother's shoulder, peace flooding her heart like a rare blessing. The next day, Daniel brought her to the Cross Estate Gardens. Roses bloomed in a blaze of red and white beneath the golden sunset. Laura froze. A small gathering of loyal friends and trusted colleagues waited seated quietly. At the center stood a stone arch entwined with flowers, simple yet breathtaking. Daniel turned to her, eyes shining. "Our first wedding was forced, a contract, but today I want a wedding by choice." He opened a velvet box, revealing a modest diamond ring that glimmered in the light. "Laura, will you marry me again? This time, not for contracts, not for pressure, but for love." Laura gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Memories of all the humiliation, the lonely nights by his bedside surged up, and then dissolved as she saw only the earnest light in his eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, Daniel, 1,000 times. Yes." Applause filled the garden. Daniel knelt, sliding the ring onto her trembling finger. Their kiss beneath the arch of roses was no longer the mark of coercion, but of freedom, of a love freely chosen. That evening in their modest apartment, Laura placed her sketchbook beside her mother's silver locket. Daniel wrapped his arms around her, his voice warm against her ear. "You kept me alive in every sketch. Now let me keep you, for the rest of our lives." Laura leaned back into his chest, whispering, "And I'll keep drawing, but this time, not a man asleep, but us, together." Through the window, city lights shimmered like stars. Laura closed her eyes, heart at peace. At last, the vows born from fear and force had been replaced by vows of love spoken freely. That spring morning, sunlight streamed crystal clear through the window panes, pouring a golden glow across the little room. Laura stood before the mirror, her fingers trembling as they touched the simple white dress. It wasn't one of the extravagant gowns from the Cross Estate, but the one she and a close friend had carefully mended and sewn by hand. Each humble stitch carried hope. Her mother sat by the window in a wheelchair, her face still pale, but her eyes alight with joy. "My sweet girl," she said softly, her voice weak yet full of warmth. "This time you're walking toward true happiness, and no one can take that away from you." Laura knelt beside her, clutching those frail hands, tears shimmering. "You're the reason I had the courage to endure everything. I just wish Father were here to see this day." Her mother's smile, deep and tender. "Your father is here in your heart, and I know he's proud of you." When Laura stepped into the garden, she froze in awe. Beneath a stone arch entwined with red and white roses, Daniel stood waiting. His navy suit framed his tall, steady figure. When their eyes met, the world seemed to fade, leaving only two hearts reaching for each other. Around them sat only a few familiar faces, loyal confidants, a handful of friends, and her mother in the front row, tears glistening in her eyes. No flashing cameras, no whispers of scandal, only the gentle rustle of petals in the breeze, the air fragrant with blossoms, bearing witness to two souls finally free to choose. Daniel stepped forward, his hand closing firmly around hers. His voice rang out deep and resolute. "Our first marriage was forced a charade staged by others. But today, beneath this sky, I want to make it clear. I need no contracts, no family honor, no binding ties. I only need you. Laura, will you walk beside me? This time, with your whole heart." Tears streamed down Laura's cheeks. Memories of sleepless nights by his bedside, the cruel jeers, the heavy loneliness, all of it melted like fog beneath sunlight. "I will," she cried then louder, her voice steady, Yes, Daniel, I will 1,000 times, I will. Applause burst through the garden, yet in that moment nothing mattered but Daniel kneeling, slipping the ring onto her finger. The same hands that had once trembled, signing a contract, now trembled with joy. Their kiss beneath the rose arch was long, deep, no longer shadowed by pressure, only filled with love freely chosen. Laura's tears fell, but this time they were the sweetest she had ever known. That night they didn't return to the grand estate, but to the humble apartment. Daniel had insisted. Our beginnings should be here in the place you call home. Laura placed her sketchbook on the shelf beside her mother's silver locket. Daniel wrapped his arms around her from behind his gaze, falling on the drawings pinned to the wall. You kept me alive in every stroke of your pencil. Now, it's my turn to keep you alive in every day to come. Laura rested her head against his chest, whispering, "And I'll keep drawing, but this time not of a sleeping man, but of us, together." Beyond the window, city lights sparkled like 1,000 stars. Laura closed her eyes, her heart brimming with peace. A journey that had begun in fear and a bitter contract had led her to the place she never dared to dream. A love true and chosen a family built with open hearts. That summer, the sky was so blue it seemed to dissolve in one's gaze. Laura sat in the small garden outside their apartment, her sketchbook open on her lap. But the pages no longer carried loneliness. Instead, they held Daniel's radiant smile, her mother's gentle face among flowers, and countless everyday moments brimming with quiet love. Footsteps sounded behind her. A warm hand rested on her shoulder. Daniel sat down beside her, eyes soft with affection. He glanced over her new sketches and smiled. "You've stopped drawing a man asleep." Laura nodded, her lips curving gently. "Because, at last, I've found someone awake. Not just from a coma, but awake in his heart." They sat together in silence as the breeze stirred rose petals around them. No wealth, no grandeur, only the simple joy of a modest home, a sunlit garden, and two hearts that had once been battered by storms now beating in harmony. Laura closed her sketchbook and leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder. Birds sang brightly, a triumphant chorus of life renewed. And in that moment, she knew the journey had ended with a miracle she had never dared to hope for: being loved, not for a contract, not for honor, but for who she truly was. And that was the greatest gift fate could ever bestow.